Hello? Oh, sweet. All right, so first and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. I want to introduce our guest speaker. Her name is Felicia George, and she's a product of Detroit. She graduated from Cass Tech in 1991. um, she obtained her high school diploma from Cass Tech in 1991 before obtaining her degrees from Wayne State University as both a Tartar and a warrior. She graduated in 1994 with a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology. While working on her degree, she was fortunate enough to conduct psychopharmacology research for 2 years. In 2000, she obtained her Master of Interdisciplinary Science degree and completed her thesis on the war on drugs and its effect on African American males. In August of 2015, after completing her dissertation on numbers gambling in Detroit, she was awarded her PhD in anthropology. She has worked in the law enforcement field for more than 20 years and has been a part-time faculty member at Wayne State University, teaching Introduction to Anthropology, Business Anthropology since 2010. And my mother has been a great mom for the last 25 years. So, Felicia George.
Well, first, I want to say thank you so very much for having me. And I really appreciate you guys giving up your lunch hour to come listen to me talk about numbers. Now, for me, it's something I'm passionate about. I love the city of Detroit. I love history. And the whole time I was on my journey of trying to get my PhD, Jazzy was stuck with me, going to the libraries, going through newspapers. I had my mom with me because I could not afford to hire research assistants. So I was really amazed and surprised when she said, "Mom, would you come do a talk on this?" Because this is the same child that every time she had to go with me to the library had an attitude. She's like, "If you say something about Joe Louis one more time, I swear for God." I said, "You swear for God what?" "Nothing. I'm getting my stuff and I'm coming to the library." So I was really surprised she had me come. So you're probably going to hear more about lottery, more about Joe Louis than you care to. But there's a story that's intersected. There's a story that tells us about the city of Detroit. And I hope when you walk away, you learn just a little something that you didn't know before you came, okay? So, I forgot I got the clicker. This picture here pretty much summarizes what it is that is covered here. It's about neighborhoods, it's about numbers, and it's about the journey of being a Black person in the early part of Detroit and what they had to do to make it. I always like to say it's an American story because what are our American values? Y'all probably didn't know this was interactive. I know you. Tell me an American value. What is one American value that we as Americans are proud of? Freedom. What else? The pursuit of happiness. Somebody, tell me something else. Home ownership. This whole notion that if you're an American, you can pull yourself up by the bootstraps, right? That everybody has a fair chance. We all like to believe that, but sometimes it's not so true. So our story first begins with the lottery. The whole notion of gambling and betting on chance has been around since antiquity. It's nothing new. We talk about it in the Bible. But the lottery was used specifically to build universities and cities. And there was a couple of slaves that even got their freedom because they won the lottery. So when the lottery came here to the United States, it was like everything else. They used it to build roads, bridges, schools. But somebody figured out it is a lot of money to be made in the lottery. And so the Louisiana lottery, and this is one of the tickets that you see up here, made a lot of money. And like everything else, like that good American value of we always thinking we're going to make an extra dollar. Somebody came up with the notion of putting insurance policy on lottery tickets. So when the lottery first came, you had to buy this ticket. You were given a serial number, and if your ticket was pulled, you won. Well, then they kind of changed it a little bit so that people could pick their own numbers. Made you feel like you had a little bit more control. And so with this insurance policy, what you would pay would be a penny or a half a penny or a part of a penny because a group of people would get together. And it would ensure that at least one of your numbers would fall, meaning we would win. And so that's important because later on, it's going to make sense when we talk about the game of policy. So the lottery and policy at one point was legal here in Michigan. It was legal from 1858 to 1878. But after that, not so much. Somebody tell me, why do you think the lottery began to be prohibited and banned? Yeah. So you taking money from the lottery people. What's another reason? No, you wasn't. You was raising your hand, but that's okay. You changed your mind. I got it. It's because of the corruption involved. So Americans started getting upset. And then one of the things that's another great American value is that good old Protestant work ethic. The average citizen did not like the notion that you could get something for nothing. And so with the fraud going against the Protestant work ethic, they slowly began to prohibit lotteries across the country. When they did that, do you think people gave up the lottery? No. We like to gamble. We ain't got time for that. So policy continued. And with policy here in Detroit, it was really, really funny. In 1880, this was a quote that came from Detroit Free Press. There's very few coons in Detroit that don't play policy. I'm telling you, and then again, there's many white folks into it as coons. So at this point, once it became legal, the media, who controls what the mainstream value system is, really started to vilify the numbers. And to vilify them, what do? You link them to a group that is not popular. And get to be black during that time wasn't popular. So you see all the headlines that was hit. And the whole notion of being against numbers and gambling, it was something that was sexy. So it made a lot of the stories in the paper. These are some other headlines. And so, we hear the term now, fake news. Well, fake news has been going on a long time. 1887, one of the greatest hindrances to the prosperity of the colored people, when once infatuated with policy, as many of the colored people are, it readily relieves them of all their spare change. 9/10 of the policy in this city, as well as in all cities in the country, are colored people. They waste no time in regrets, and one failure or 50 failures do not rob them the game of its fascination. I don't know what, I guess my mic don't like. About that policy game in Detroit, it is nothing but a Negro's game. And I consider it not important enough to pay much attention to it. They are a slide line, And it's hard to catch them with the goods. They carry their policy plays and policy sheets in their hats, up their sleeves, and make their play in a secret manner. So we're continuing to vilify this. Continue to make it just black people are playing. But do you guys think that was true? Oh, heck no. Because if only black people was playing, it would be bankrupt. It wasn't enough black folks to keep it, to make it profitable. And black people didn't have easy cash flow like that. So yeah, fake news was around even then. This picture was one that was very, very popular. Asking a hand, let me be the possessor of the lovely number 7. By 1902, they estimated in the city of Detroit, there were only 4,000 policy players. And what was interesting about that was, if you were to believe those news articles, every last one of them and 111 other folks that were not telling people they were black were the only people playing policy. Because if you only had 4,000 people playing and you only had 4,111 black people, we got some issues here. By 1895, all lotteries in the United States were illegal. Guys, remember, a few years back, it became legal in Michigan already. And by 1908, the newspapers declared that policy was gone. Nobody was interested anymore. It wasn't being played. And so we're going to pause a second talking about policy to talk about one of the main people that's involved in this whole story. John Roxborough. What's interesting about him is he came from a black bourgeois family. His family was from Ohio originally, before they came here to Detroit. His dad was an attorney and had a very, very interesting past. He went to school, and when he went to school, he was very, very bright. He was supposed to have a scholarship, and they were not happy that they were going to award a black person a scholarship. So they ended up attacking his dad, stabbing him. But that didn't keep him from going to school. He went on, became an attorney, moved his family to Louisiana, and he was there for a while. But he noticed he was having a whole lot of race problems in Louisiana. So he migrated to the north, to Detroit, with his family to start over. He settled in the Hamtramck area, which was really unusual because that was a heavy Polish community. And he was welcomed in that community. So much so that at one point he ran to be a state senator for that section of the city to represent them, and almost won. Didn't, but almost won. And you can look at those pictures of that family. That's John and his brothers. And you can tell they're not your average poor, down on your luck families that were struggling at that time. So I want you to pay attention to, this is John Roxborough to the right. To the left is his partner, Everett Watson, who's talking to somebody that I want you to remember who this is. His name is Chester O'Hara. And we're going to talk about Chester O'Hara in a minute. Can we play the audio clip?
You'd ask for a job, tell them you were a college graduate, and they'd say, oh yeah, we have a porter's job for you. The hell with education. What good would it do me? I made up my mind that when I got a chance to make money, no matter how, I'd take it. I would avoid embarrassing situations like asking for a job when I was qualified. I also promised myself I'd help myself first, then I'd help my black brothers.
So that was his stance. He came from this family of education. His family was pushing him to go to school because, after all, another American of value, education is the key to upward mobility, right? But he said, nope, not for me. I'll be damned if I go to college, get a law degree, because that's what he was going to do. He actually went a year and a half. And then once I become a lawyer, now I have to be a porter and not use the education that I got. So instead, what he did was he had a bunch of jobs. He was a hustler. He worked for the post office for 6 years, which was a really, really good job back then. If you worked for the post office, you had arrived. And then he took his money from there and became a bail bondsman. And it was actually him bailing out someone from Kansas City that changed his life in the course of history. There was a Kansas City policy operator there. This guy ran policy houses illegally in Kansas City. And he said to John, he said, what is up with you square folks in Detroit? I said, what are you talking about? He said, you've got all these people migrating to Detroit to work in an automotive plant, and y'all don't have one policy house. Do you know how much money is made in people betting? And so he said, if you stick with me, I'm going to teach you how this game is played. I'm going to help you set up a policy house. And that's exactly what he did. Now, while he's setting up his policy house, John's brother, Charles, goes, becomes an attorney, and eventually gets elected with his brother's support, the first black state senator in the state of Michigan. But that was because of John. So the man that's sitting next to Chester O'Hara, his name is Everett Watson. He was, in fact, a porter. And so they combined their money, and they opened up the first policy house called the Big Four. So let me explain how policy worked. It was actually kind of a complicated game because it had all these rules, but it was gambling, so people liked it. What you would do is you would pick numbers from 1 to 78. You can bet on one number, two numbers, three numbers, that they would be pulled from this little tube. Out of this tube, they would have the individual numbers in these little pieces of cloth bound up inside a rubber tube. And those things to your right are actually the slips telling you what the winning number was for the day. Or I should say numbers. So let's say, for instance, you had picked one number to win, and your number fell, and you put 5 cents down on it, you won a quarter. But think about it. This was a time when that was a lot of money. And pennies and quarters added up. And so people played. And the houses began to multiply. So eventually, John and Everett would part ways. They became friends. They stayed friends, but they went their separate ways because they had a fight over a woman. And you're going to see that's a recurring thing throughout this whole story. You devilish women, you. Always messing stuff up. So they had a separation, and it was running their policy houses, and they were making money, hand over fist. But one thing John Roxenberg was, he was smart. John Roxenberg was smart. He said, I'm going to make my wealth. And what did he say earlier? I'm going to take care of myself, and then I'm going to take care of my black brothers next. And that's what he did. He did it for a couple of reasons. One, he was a race man. But two, he was thinking, always thinking, when you take care of your community takes care of you. And so he took a lot of money and he reinvested it back in the community. And it's because of him that a lot of black businesses got their start. Because guess what? Banks wouldn't give you a loan. So where'd you go? You went to the numbers man. They would help you get money for financing for businesses, pay for you to go to school. If somebody was sick and didn't have the money for a doctor, he would front it. So he did a lot for the community, and the community loved and respected him. So time is going along, and a man out of New York came up with a much simpler game that was easier than policy. And it was simply called the numbers. And with this, you had to pick three numbers, 3 digits. You picked your own 3. So it's more straightforward. But you had to figure out a way, where was the winning number going to come? Because there was some controversy with policy. There was corruption in it. Go figure. People didn't trust people pulling those supposed numbers out of that wheel. And it was actually kind of expensive, time-consuming to announce what the numbers were. Because think about it. You had to pick out those 12, 24, 36 numbers. Then you had to print up the paper. Then you had to plaster it everywhere so people would know what the winning numbers were. So they said, we got to come up with a more simplistic way. And that's what happened. A guy from New York named Casper Halston, he was a janitor. He figured this out. He said, I got the perfect game. These 3 digits, the numbers would be based on the races. So nobody could say it was fixed. So this is how this worked. If you look at that actual ticket there, the person played 801. So I'm going to tell you how it is that you can decipher what this means. In the lower corner, you see it says BF, before. That stands for the Big Four. So that's what house that you were playing with, what company you were playing with. For example, Everett Watson, his was the yellow dog. So it had down at the bottom yellow dog. This 801, they bet 10 cents on it. And you see it's got a box around it. So that means it was boxed. So any variation of 801, they would win. It's got the date on it. And down at the bottom, you see it's got 3RA. That stands for the 3 first races. And this is how you know what the winning number is. Anybody could grab a newspaper and take a look at the winning numbers and figure out what the winning number was. So since this was the first 3 races, it is actually the first decimal point, the number that's in the front of the first decimal point was the number for the first 3 races. So for this day, the winning number was 874. Brilliant, right? Everybody could find out just by grabbing the newspaper. It wasn't fixed. People loved it. Now, once again, the notion was this was just black people playing. You guys believe that? Oh, no. And like everything else in Detroit, it was segregated. So you had your black policy number houses, you had your Polish ones, you had your Italians, you had your Jewish ones. So everybody had a piece of the pie. And so you would go based on who you identified with. So people would ask, why did people play? Simple, to win, for entertainment. Some people like the challenge. And believe it or not, it became a habit. There was so much activity around numbers. Because think about it. They didn't have smartphones, didn't have the internet. Numbers drew communities together. That's what you would gossip about. You would start conversations with it. What was the number for the day? And that was a big deal. Numbers was a way to support each other as well. Believe it or not, if someone was struggling, everybody would pool money together and try to figure out what that winning number would be so they could help out their neighbor. And everybody had a strategy of how it was that they could pick those winning numbers. Some people relied on luck. Some people relied on God, a gut feeling. Some people had these foolproof systems that they would sell, which I always think is hilarious, these rundowns that made absolutely no sense to nobody, but it worked in their mind. But my favorite way people pick numbers are dreams. So who knows what a dream book is? Try to be all shy. Girl, you probably got 4 or 5 at home. I actually collect dream books. I love them. The old ones are my favorite. Nobody knows the history of these dream books. Just enterprising people would produce them, and they would come up with these numbers. So for a word, it would be given a number. Sometimes it would be a 3-digit number. Sometimes it would be a single number. Sometimes it would be a double number. So one of the oldest policy books is Old Aunt Dinah's. And my favorite are the 3 Wise Men dream books. Because guess what? The guy who wrote the 3 Wise Men dream books, he's from Detroit. No, he wasn't a professor. And you open it up, you read it, it's got all this mystical stuff, talking about how intelligent he is, how he got it from the stars. He was just some ordinary guy that was smart enough to copyright a numbers book. And what was really interesting about this guy, he was black. We had a lot of mafia going on in Detroit at the time. We had the Purple Gang, we had Italians, they were fighting. But what was really, really interesting, what people don't realize is the Detroit black numbers operators, they were in themselves a syndicate. They were not violent, they were very, very close-knit. These guys were so close, not just here in Detroit, but across the country. They would rent out a whole train. That tells you how much money they had. And they would meet every year at a location that they picked out, a resort usually. And they would meet to come talk about strategies on keeping their companies going, on marketing, on rules, on payouts. And they did this every year. And what we saw in other parts of the country, New York and Chicago, you had a lot of fighting going on. And the mafia would come in and they would take over the smaller operations and sometimes the black ones. So we saw the Harlem Wars in Harlem, where the mafia took over that from the black numbers operators. We saw it in Chicago, but it didn't happen in Detroit. And that's something that's very, very distinct. And everybody wondered, why? Why the heck did this not happen? And a big part of it was John Roxborough. A big part of it was the money he had, the political influence he had, the fact that he was Joe Louis' manager, and we're going to talk about that in a second. This man commanded power, and they knew not to mess with him. He controlled the wire service. What that means is he was the one who picked the race that determined where the winning numbers would come from, and that is power. Numbers was so popular that they had songs about it. People would use numbers terminology in everyday talks. So I'd go in the grocery store, give me a gig, and blah, 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 and people would know what that meant. A gig was 3. But numbers hit music, and it hit it in a funny way. Can you play this for me, please? But it gets better. So if your grandparents ever tell you that y'all are some nasty people that have no morals and your music is nasty, remember this. Can you play this one for me? Nope, hang on 1 second. There we go. I beg my baby, let me in her door. I beg my baby, let me in her door. He nasty as heck. He gonna put his 25, 50, 75 and her 7, 17, 24. Most people knew what that meant. They didn't have to grab a dream book and look it up. But what was funny about dream books, no two were the same. So 25, 50, 75 meant his cucumber vine elephant in one book. And we know what that is. But in another book, it meant he wanted to put his dirty laundry and rub it in her washing pan. So either way it went, he was getting it. And he was nasty, and he got away with it. But as I was telling you before, Roxborough was so important in this community. He hired hundreds to work in numbers organizations, and this is important for a number of reasons. At the height of what he was doing, the Depression hit in 1929 and went on for a number of years. He was hiring people that couldn't find jobs. And not only was he hiring low-skilled workers, he was hiring high-skilled workers. So if you were an accountant and you were black, you were not going to get hired at a company or accounting firm, but you could go work at a numbers house and get paid for your skill and make that kind of money. The same way with lawyers, because you know what? They got caught, and they needed good lawyers to get them off. So just about every black lawyer at one point worked for him or another numbers organization, but it allowed them to use their skill. They talk about at times if it had not been for him, people would have starved and would have froze to death. And some of them very, very bad winters back then. He made sure he invested money in legal businesses and in civic causes, sent a bunch of people to college, as I said earlier. But one of the businesses that was really important was the Great Lakes Mutual Insurance Company. And it was founded by him and a couple of others to make sure that blacks had affordable insurance. First of all, it was hard getting insurance if you were black. And then if you were able to find somebody that would write your policy, it was usually 5 to 10 times higher than what it was for anybody else. So this was a big deal. He actually had a newspaper. It was a black newspaper. That was a big deal because they would cover stories that would not get covered about black people in the mainstream papers. The AWCP and the Urban League, he gave them a lot of money, kept them floating. But what was really interesting about it was these same organizations that were so happy to take his money, they didn't want his type a part of their organization. So they had this double standard. But John was a little bit different. Because he managed Joe Louis, he then got social capital, and he was acceptable. This quote right here is really good. Let's talk about how he's one of the most outstanding of the Negro operators and is looked upon as a sort of demigod among the many patrons who play on his book. And he was. People thought he was great. And it wasn't just because of what he did with the numbers. It was more so the fact that he was the manager of Joe Louis. So let's talk about that. John liked sport. And one of the things that he wanted to do was he wanted to manage something, either a basketball team or a boxer. And one day he saw Joe Louis boxing and he went, oh my God, this kid can punch. Joe Louis at this time was playing the violin. The story goes, was not telling his mom he was actually taking the violin lesson money, going to the gym, boxing. But he had raw talent. He was strong. But he wasn't too bright. We'll talk about that in a minute too. Had a kind heart, but again, not too bright. So John took him, became his manager. He got these basic rules for him. He dressed him up, he fed him, he made sure he got him a great trainer that would get him ready. And these rules were real simple. 1, you will always be a big gentleman. 2, never say anything bad about whoever your opponent is. Never smile after beating a white opponent. Never go into a nightclub alone. And above all, never take a picture with white women. Does anybody know why he was so hard on him about this? Anybody but Jasmine. Because she loves her some Joe Louis. Jack Johnson. Ding, 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 ding. If I had something, I'd throw you a prize. She's right. It's because of Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson was the last black heavyweight boxing champion that the United States had seen many years ago. And he acted a damn fool. And they had said there will never be another black boxer that's the heavyweight champion in this country. That's how foolish he acted. He consorted with white women. Not supposed to do that, not during Jim Crow. He lost his mind. He flaunted that. He had all of this money, these fast cars, driving around like an idiot, crashing stuff. So he left a bad taste in mainstream society's mouth about what it was to be a champion. And so John Roxborough knew, I have to fight that image. I've got to craft the image for Joe Louis, or he will never stand a chance to even contend, to even challenge whoever the heavyweight champion was. And he did an excellent job of it. He painted Joe Louis out to be this choir mama's boy. He married pretty young. He married a socialite. He was never seen smoking cigarettes, drinking liquor, consorting with other women. This image was pure. And slowly but surely, people started loving Joe Louis, and it didn't matter what color they were. Some other things about Joe Louis that was really interesting, when I said he had a heart of gold, if he had $1, he would give it away. If that was his last dollar, it didn't matter, he would still give it away. Part of why Joe Louis' story was so tragic is because people took advantage of him. He died penniless. He had nothing when he died. But he had did so much for the world. I won't even say just Detroit, for the world. It was unbelievable. And all of this was because of John. John created this image, made sure he stuck with it, put him in the right places, groomed him to become this champion that he became. So Joe Louis, he wins the heavyweight champion, and it's argued that he became America's first black hero. People didn't see race with Joe Louis anymore. What they saw was America's heavyweight champion. And when he knocked out Max Schmeling, right when the Second World War was booming, he showed that Americans had this power and Germans were not, this superior race. Oh, people love Joe Louis. Remember I said Joe Louis is not the smartest buff out there? So you see this poster? He got drafted. This is when the Second World War was going on. And Joe Louis refused to dodge the draft. He could have used his money and wealth to do it, but he didn't. And before he went to the Army, he was doing these exhibition fights to raise money for veterans who were hurt in the war. And one of the fights that he did was for the Navy Relief Society. And it was really, really, really important when he did it. At that point, the Navy wouldn't let blacks into it. No. All you could do in the Navy was be a cook. And Joe Louis shamed him. He fought this exhibition battle, donated his whole purse to them. And after that, they were like, Joe, join the Navy. And he said, no, I'm just going to join the Army. And that's what he did. So he joins the Army, but he wasn't a soldier. They had him going around boxing, keeping soldier spirits up. But this quote on this poster is really important. He said, we're going to do our part and we'll win because we're on God's side. That poster was iconic. It was posted everywhere. But Joe Louis, because he wasn't the smartest thing in the world, he had a secretary to tutor that was permanently assigned to him. And Joe actually boxed that quote. That's not what it was supposed to say. He flipped it. And when he did it, his secretary was like, oh, Joe, you messed up again. That's not what you're supposed to say. He's like, whatever. So the next day, the papers ran it, and it was a headline. And they received all of this attention. Joe Louis came up to that secretary. He said, see, who's the big dummy now? Everybody is on my side. And so Joe would have problem like that after problem after that, like after that. So he had a lot of businesses. And one of them he had was Joe Louis Punch. It was a soft drink. Black people were so happy. Yes, he's got Joe Louis Punch. Joe was invited to do an interview on the radio. And they were setting him up to promote his drink. And they asked Joe Louis, I said, Joe, you're the champion. What's your favorite drink you like to drink? What do you guys think Joe Louis said? Coca-Cola. Damn, Joe. Like everything else that he touched, that went bankrupt. Poor Joe. But while all of this is going on, in the background, the numbers are still rolling in Detroit. 1939. And guess what? It's getting ready to come to a screeching halt, at least for a minute. And it's all because of this woman up here. So Janet McDonald worked at one of the white numbers operations. She was a secretary. And she was dating the manager of that organization, her Billy. She loved her some Billy. That's Billy with the hair that's kind of nasty and greasy hanging down. That's Billy. And Billy got tired of Janet. He wanted to move on to another woman. So he gave her the best line ever. He said, Janet, you're too good for me. I'm a scoundrel. Move on. Find you another love. But Janet wasn't having it because she loved her some Billy. And so she met with him one night and she said, Billy, I'm going to give you one more chance because you know you want all of this. And Billy said, not so much. And she said, okay. So what he didn't know was she had wrote all these letters. And in these letters, she told on everybody. Everybody. She said, let me tell y'all what's going on. People gambling all up in through Detroit. It's blacks, it's white folks. These are the people who are operating this place, operating that place. And guess what? You know how they're able to do it? They paying off the police. And not only are they paying off the police, they paying off the mayor. And I got proof. So she writes all these letters. She goes, she was a divorcee, and that's her daughter that's with her. She went and got her daughter. And to this day, the garage is still standing where she did this. She went, she dressed her daughter up in this pretty pink taffeta dress, went to a garage, turned the car on, took a hose from the exhaust pipe, put it through a window, shut the door, and killed herself and her daughter. But before she did that, in those letters she wrote, she had a couple on her body, but she knew the corrupt Detroit Police Department was not going to put it in the right hands because they were taking payola. So she mailed them. She mailed one to the governor, one to the FBI, one to the Detroit News, one to the Detroit Free Press, one to the Detroit Tribune. She made sure she mailed them to everybody who would pick up the story. And that's what happened. When citizens found out this woman killed herself and her baby, they were outraged. And then when they found out she had these people that she was accusing, these elected officials, the police who's supposed to protect and serve, were doing this, they were pissed. Detroit police tried their best to tamp it down, but it didn't work. So they put together a one-man grand jury, and they authorized him to find out if this is true. And if it is, we want you to prosecute what's going on. So they did. They got to investigate it. And by April 1940, they indicted 135 people. Every last one of the numbers men operators, including John Roxborough and his partner, Everett Watson, the mayor, the Wayne County prosecutor, the sheriff, they all were part of this, and the rest were a bunch of police officers that were taking bribes. They went to trial, found them guilty. They were all just about found guilty. All the main players were. They were all sentenced and sent away. That guy on the phone, that's the mayor. When everybody talking about who's the most corrupt mayor, I always hear, Kwame. Oh, no, it's Coleman Young. No, it's not. It's Richard Reed. Took millions of dollars in bribes to keep this quiet. The guy coming out of the door was a county prosecutor, and to this day, he used to wear hats all the time, which was the norm then. There is a hat in the prosecutor's office that they have in glass that they keep in case to remind prosecutors, never do anything wrong where you have to get escorted out of here so fast you don't have time to get your hat. That's to remind them not to be corrupt. The guy that's being sworn in is the sheriff of Wayne County. All of them went down. And for a minute, numbers paused. It didn't stop. They just put new people in charge of it. This is October 4th, 1946. John went into prison. He did 2 years, and he was released. And this is the day he was released. He ended up dying. He was married twice, didn't have children. And to this day, he doesn't even have a headstone. All he has is a marker of where he's buried. He died December 13, 1975. This man who contributed all this great stuff to the city of Detroit, who was Joe Lewis's manager, That's all he has left. And the marker is 198. If you look it up in my favorite dream book, it means free. But he lived long enough to see something. The lottery becoming legalized. May 16, 1972, that's when they did it. Voters came, they voted overwhelmingly to end it, to make it legal again. And up until a month before it was legalized, the newspaper were still carrying stories about how horrible people were that played the lottery. But once they got legalized, guess what? Now we got to change that image. It's okay. Please come out and play the lottery. They made it big. My favorite picture is her. She's standing there. The legal numbers man got her lottery tickets. But do you think this actually stopped illegal numbers? No. Nobody paid attention to it. And this is why. The lottery even said that. We do not believe the weekly lottery has provided competition for organized crime. Our game is so dissimilar from the daily quick action numbers racket that it cannot compete. And they were right, it couldn't. You had to buy a ticket, couldn't pick your own numbers. It was complicated how it happened. You know, you could win on a daily fashion. You could win big money, but it wasn't the same. Not the little money that people liked that kept them coming back. And then the state had to do a knockout job. They had to make sure that they had people buying into it. Because now I vilified you last month. Now I got to tell you it's the greatest thing since sliced cheese. So they had all these campaigns. The very first lottery winner, he worked at Chrysler. They had all these newspaper articles about he's a Chrysler worker. The first thing he did was go buy him a Chrysler. The second winner, she was an immigrant. She couldn't even speak English, but they were like, yes, this is American dream. She came to America. This is what we did this for. But guess what? They still weren't making the money numbers people were because they did not have the 3-digit. So in 1977, here it comes. The 3-digit came, and they like to say it's the ultimate takeover. The government was the real gangsters because they had a corner on the market. Had to play with them. That was the only way to make it legal. And so since 1977, billions of dollars, not millions, have been made across the country on this 3-digit. They stole all the rules, the way they did it, from people who were not thought very much of. So I end this whole story by saying I go all the way around talking about numbers, how it impacted the communities, who it was that it influenced, the influence these people had on people across the world. Joe Louis being the first Black American hero, he segregated the Navy. One of the other things that he did was he was the first Black to play for the PGA. So he did a lot. All of the contributions that they made, you cannot really pinpoint one thing because they did so much. So I really appreciate, I know you guys just got to get ready to go because you only had an hour to listen to me going on. I really, really, really appreciate your time. But there's one thing I want each of you to do. I am very appreciative of Black History Month. I am. Because it was brought about to fulfill a need that we need to make sure that Black history is out there and people understand it. But it has to go away. And it has to go away for a bigger, greater cause. I don't want you to think of this story today as a Black story. I want you to think of it as what it is. It's our story. It's a Detroit history story. And that's how we have to start thinking about this. We have to stop separating what's Black, what's white, because guess what? It's all intertwined. So thank you guys so very much for your time. If you have questions, I will take some, but I know you guys are running out. No questions? Okay, good. Yes. Well, this is what happened. He gets out of prison, and he actually becomes the president of an insurance company. And so that's what he did for years before he finally died. It was the Detroit Owl, and it was only a 4-page little weekly that came out, but that's the one that he created. Nope. And that was the sad part, because you're right, it brought people together. They would have to go in the neighborhood, pick up the tickets. They would have to go back to do the payouts. And it was a very, very strong community thing, but nothing replaced it. And that's actually the sad part of the story. Yes, sir. It's really, really funny. There's a couple of theories that I have. One, that cemetery at one point didn't allow blacks to be buried there. And so you could think maybe it was his way of getting slid in there because he, on the low, buried his mother there, but he made sure she had a headstone. The other thing is he didn't have any children. And so who's left to make sure things like that are taken care of? And then the third reason is, believe it or not, when I was talking to the people at the cemetery, they said, you know what? People with money are some of the tightest people ever. So what are you talking about? They said if their whole take is, why waste money on a headstone? He dead. So that could be a reason. If you don't make sure I have a headstone, I will haunt you. Yes, ma'am. Well, which one was that? That's not Woodland. Which one was that? Detroit? No, it's not Elmwood. It's on the west side. We go to cemeteries a lot, and they run together. I know that sounds kind of weird. But yeah, it's one on the west side, and I can't think of the name right now. It'll pop to me in a second. Woodmere. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's Woodmere. No other questions? Okay, again, thank you so very much for your time.